Hello, I'm Dr. Judy Ho, and welcome to Mental Health Bites. In this podcast, we'll cover a timely topic, answer your burning questions, and leave you with a practical tip to improve your wellness every single day. Let's get right to the timely topic of today. I want to talk to you about existential anxiety. Now, this is a topic that is not as well covered as the other forms of anxiety that we oftentimes talk about, like generalized anxiety, panic attacks, and phobias. But the truth is, I think existential anxiety affects probably everybody to some degree at some point in their lives because it's all about the type of stress and anxiety that comes with getting older, trying to find meaning, making sense of your life, and making sure that you had a well lived life with the time that you had on earth. So, existential anxiety, I think, is best described as just a feeling of being unsettled, not necessarily knowing where you're headed next. I think that there's a colloquial term for this, which is the midlife crisis. We've even heard that there's been an early life crisis in some individuals, especially when they're really attuned to their mental health from a young age. They may start to ponder the meaning of life at a much earlier time than, for example, in their 40s or 50s. And one of the things that I noticed the most about existential anxiety, and an area where it's not talked about as often, is what happens when a loved one passes or when you're dealing with some type of grief and loss over something important in your life. We oftentimes talk about depression as a response to grief, but I think what is not talked about as much is a anxiety response to grief and when you have a certain loss, because when you lose something, whether it's a person, a job, a part of your identity, there's a real sense of what's next for you. What am I supposed to be doing next? And those types of questions cause us to grapple with symptoms of anxiety from time to time. Now, the prevalence of existential anxiety is not well known, as I mentioned, because it's not talked about quite as often. But I actually think that it's more prevalent than the other forms of anxiety that are discussed more often in your therapist's office or even on social media as you're talking among your friends. It can hit individuals of all ages, but particularly during life transitions or times of extreme stress or crises. While existential anxiety itself doesn't always lead to a clinical diagnosis, it can contribute to or exacerbate other mental health conditions like depression or generalized anxiety disorder. So, why does existential anxiety happen? I provided a few clues so far, but here are some other concerns that may arise that lead to existential anxiety presenting itself. One is the fear of death. So, that awareness, that keen awareness that we're not here forever, the mortality and the inevitability of death for all of us can lead to anxiety for a lot of people because it challenges us to confront the finite nature of our existence in this world. Existential anxiety can also happen because of meaninglessness. So, this is when there are questions about the purpose and meaning of life that can lead to existential anxiety, especially when people struggle to find direction or purpose. Existential anxiety can also happen with freedom and responsibility and the realization of that. So, this realization that we're free to make choices in life, that we are in charge of a large part of our lives and our daily direction, and that we're responsible ultimately for these choices, that can lead to feelings of overwhelm and then the associated anxiety that comes with it. And then finally, isolation, a sense of isolation or loneliness, especially in the context of understanding yourself as somebody who is distinct from other people and maybe not feeling like you have a community to support you, can also contribute to feelings of existential anxiety. So, why is it important to address it? Well, clearly it's impacting our mental health. When we have existential anxiety that is not being dealt with, it can lead to feelings of despair and hopelessness and elevate your risk factors for other forms of mental health issues. And that's why it's so important to really be able to examine it and analyze it. But of course, that makes it difficult when you have to confront these questions of existential anxiety. It can feel too big. And so that's why it's really important to get with a trusted community, friends and family that you trust, or a trusted professional to be able to move through some of this. Addressing these existential concerns can lead to a more fulfilling and meaningful life. It encourages people to reflect on their values and their beliefs and what's truly important to them and make the most out of every single day. Addressing existential anxiety will also improve your resilience. This is your ability to confront challenges and arrive on the other side being a better and more improved person. And finally, authenticity. When you confront existential anxiety, you're being true to who you are. You're being true to our existence as human beings. We are all going to struggle with this at some point in our lives in some way, shape, or form. And so it's really helpful to be able to embrace that, to accept it, and to learn how you can use this experience to improve your life. So, I want to talk a little bit about the resources and also ways in which you can address existential anxiety because there are a lot of different ways to address it. Um, we're going to have a practical tip at the end of this podcast episode that's really going to help you with your meaning making. But just as a preview, some of the coping strategies that you might want to embark on could include creative expressions, being able to express yourself through forms of art, writing. This can be a powerful outlet for exploring and coping with existential concerns. Also, engaging with philosophical texts and discussions that can provide a broader perspective on existential issues as well and help you to feel like you're comforted that this is a common human experience that we all share. There's a couple of books that I'd recommend. One of them is called The Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. And then another one is Existential Psychotherapy by Irvin Yalom. These are excellent resources for understanding and addressing existential anxiety. And I really think that they're great readings, not only for professionals, but also just for people who are curious into delving into this further. Finally, radical acceptance. That is going to be something that will be very, very important in addressing existential anxiety. It's easier said than done, but it's this idea of, hey, I can't change this. So, what is the best thing I can do in this moment to try to alleviate a little bit of the stress and a little bit of the anxiety? Let's move on to the Q&A segment of today. Today's question comes from a podcast subscriber. Her first name is Carla. And Carla asks, how can I differentiate between normal existential thoughts and existential anxiety? And how do I know that this is something that requires professional intervention? So, this is a great question. As I mentioned at the earlier section of this podcast episode, all of us are going to grapple with existential anxiety at some point. But when do we know that it's something that needs intervention or is getting serious versus something that is just, fleeting thoughts that we're all going to have? And I would say that if you feel like it's negatively impacting your ability to engage in other important activities of life, that's your first tip off that maybe you need to consult a professional. Something else is if it's consuming all of your thoughts, you literally can't move past it and you find yourself contending with existential fears and ruminating on these kinds of ideas multiple times a day and it's taking up more than an hour of your day. I think that that's also a sign that maybe you should seek some professional support. At the end of the day, all of us are going to grapple with some level of existential fears and crises, but it's all about how we're managing it and if it's still allowing us to live the life we ultimately want to live. And that I think is a final consideration for whether or not you want professional support or you can just move through that using your regular coping strategies and talking through it with other people. Hope that's helpful. Let's move on to today's actionable tip. So, what do we do when we have existential crises? What do we do when we just want to live a more meaningful and valued life every single day? Well, the answer is values based living. And my favorite way to do this is through a values clarification exercise, followed by some easy ways to make sure that you're engaging in your values every single day. So, step one, identify your core values. There are thousands of values. There's no right or wrong answer here. But values are not things that you can check off of a list. Values are things that essentially you want to move in the direction of, you want to move in concert with. It's how you want to be talked about in the room when you're not there. And it's ultimately how you want to be remembered by other people when your time on earth is over. And I have a values card sort that you can download from my website, drjudyho.com. I'll make sure to link that to this episode. But you can also just Google values lists and you can come up with a lot of different other types of values lists that are out there, which will show you some of the top values, but they're by no means an exhaustive list. A great way to start is to look at this values list and just circle your top 5 values. And they can be different from day to day, but a lot of times people will find that some of their top values are going to maintain a certain pattern or remain the same over time. And whatever the case may be, once you find out what your top 5 values are, then there's a few things that I love to do that will help us to engage in our values further. Just do a values check in at the end of every day. So at the end of the day, check in with your top 5 values and ask yourself, is there something that I did in this day, however small, that represented an honoring or engagement with each of these top values? If the answer is no to any of it, then make a commitment again in the next 24 hours to do something to engage in or to participate in concert with that value. And that takes just a couple of minutes at the end of your day. So it's an easy way to review your day and think about ways that you can improve the next day. I love to do values based self care. So when you're thinking about self care, think about activities that will nourish one or more of your top values. That's a really helpful way to find self care activities that are engaging and are going to bring you the most joy. Another way I love working with values is to use values in decision making. If you find yourself being stuck between 2 options, ask yourself which of these options is going to allow me to honor my top values more. And when you do that, you're going to have a lot less buyer's remorse and you're going to feel much more confident about your decisions. Finally, I love using values to anchor my goal setting. So before I commit to a goal, I'm going to ask myself, is this goal in alignment with at least one of my top values? If it's not, you have to learn to say no and turn down some things because ultimately, once you reach that goal, you're going to feel empty inside because it's not anchored or linked to one of the top values. So it's not going to be as meaningful for you as you might have otherwise thought. And sometimes we say yes to goals because we think that's the thing we should be doing because we're afraid of what somebody will say if we say no. And I think it's really important to know that the more that you can anchor your goals to your values, the more motivation and engagement and energy you're going to have at achieving that goal and having success. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of Mental Health Bites with Dr. Judy. If you enjoyed this video and found it helpful, there's plenty more where that came from. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and click the bell icon so you never miss an update. Give this video a thumbs up if you liked it and leave a comment below with your thoughts and any questions that you have. Also, feel free to share this video with your friends and family who might find it useful. Stay tuned for more awesome content and thank you so much for all your support.